everybody for being here. Again, my name is John Fall, and my company is Dark Rider Consulting. And we make, DevOps is hard, so we can help and we make it a lot easier. And my goal today is for everybody to leave this room, technical or not technical, and understand what DevOps is. Hopefully. It's hard. So I could have made this a really technical conversation and it could have went down kind of like this, but that's not what I'm going to do today. So the thing is a lot of companies get DevOps really wrong, and when they are either going to more of a DevOps culture or they start to transition, they make lots and lots of mistakes. So a little bit about me. I don't look very old, but I got a lot of traction in the market. I was a veteran in the Navy, and I spent years with Lockheed Martin as an engineer on multiple projects. I also worked as a systems lead for Department of Defense, and I was the FCIO for the Philadelphia Regional Office and Insurance Center. Also worked at multiple enterprises. I've led multiple startups. I co-founded a startup. I also run my own consultancy. I've migrated data centers. I've helped multiple clients transition in the cloud. That's what makes me a good DevOps mercenary. And just as a side note, I write fantasy fiction. And a book dropped yesterday. So what is DevOps? And why is it so hot right now? So most organizations think DevOps is a title or it's a technology, and those things are kind of true, but really DevOps is a transition from the old school of IT departments where you have a Windows administration team, network admins, software developers, QA, all that sort of stuff, and really it breaks all those barriers down into a more cohesive unit of automation to deliver value and product efficiently. It's a culture change is what it is, and it is hard. But we're not going to talk about all the high-tech stuff right now. I'm going to start with an analogy to give you more of what I do and what I do for my business and my clients. So we're going to talk about a fake company called Bread Company, and they make the absolute best bread in the world, and everybody wants to buy their bread. But they have lots of challenges, and this is what the consumer buys. Now this could be bread, it could be a software as a service, it could be a widget, a vehicle, a smoothie. It doesn't really matter what it is. What it represents is value. So, if I were to come into a company like Bread Company, I would be working on things like the observability to make sure that when bread goes through the track, that it's the right shape, it's not burnt, it gets packaged the right way, and when you have bread fall off the track, like what happened on this piece of bread here, that somebody gets notified. So I work on the observability of the company. I also work on the scalability of a company. So you're making either just enough bread for what your consumers are wanting to buy. You don't overproduce, you don't underproduce. This is called scaling or capacity planning. I do a lot of that work as well. I also work on the security side of the business as well. This could be protecting your bread's recipes, protecting your employees, protecting your equipment so it doesn't get stolen. All the security side of the business. As well as the automation side. I automate a lot of infrastructure. This makes sure things like the dough gets mixed up, in the right proportions. It goes down the track. It doesn't get burned. It does get packaged properly. It does get, shipped properly. I do a lot of that work as well. And ultimately, I handle a lot of delivery work. So I do a lot of what's called pipeline work to make sure that your value gets to your customer efficiently, error-free, and as predictably as possible. So now, let's take this to a more realistic situation because, let's be honest, I have no experience in a factory at all. I made all that stuff up. I don't know how conveyor belts and things like that work. But let's take Bread Company as an e-commerce site, which is more realistic to the kinds of things I do. You as the consumer here are wanting to order bread from some sort of website, and you just can't wait to get it. But when you get it, and when you order, you expect that when you share your personal information with the company, like your credit card, your email, your mailing address, you expect it to be secure. That they're not, keeping it unencrypted. They're not, messing or sharing that data. You also expect that if there's a problem with your order, that somebody gets notified automatically. and that they're on it and they're fixing it for you. You expect that when there's new features that come down the pipe, that it doesn't break your app. You get your coupons, you get your new orders, you get whatever it is, and it's as seamless as possible. You also expect that on Black Friday, when everybody's buying bread like crazy, that their website is online. You expect it to be available all the time. You expect it to be responsive, and not give you errors, not screw up your orders. And you ultimately want to be transferred to somebody to give you help if there's a problem, maybe there's an IT problem, maybe there's an order problem, whatever it is. So really, all of these things map into places I work. So as you can see, I don't really make bread itself, but I help organize all the things around getting that bread to that customer or getting the value to the customer. So, to get to the community asks. So my clients are typically in New York City, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Boston, and not Western North Carolina. So I would really love to meet more businesses in Western North Carolina. I'd love to work with businesses in Western Carolina. I do a lot of mentoring with younger tech folks or business owners that need help. And I'd really like to get stitched in this community. So if you or someone that you know is talking about needing help with a major cloud like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud Platform or Azure, I'm the kind of person that can help with that. If they say I need automation help or just help in the cloud, those are the kinds of things I do. There's lots of clouds out there, believe it or not. Also data center work. I've migrated multiple data centers, and it is a very complex job, but I can either advise or directly help those kinds of customers, as well as leveling up development teams. Sometimes development teams either don't know newer techniques or they haven't learned more modern ways to build in the cloud, and I can come in and mentor them and get them moving faster. So I had a client once say, we're not sure if we're secure, which is a really good way of saying we're definitely not secure. Security is another thing that I have a lot of experience with, especially in my time working in the Department of Defense. And most of all, if you hear someone say, we need DevOps help, that is exactly in my alley. Because all this ecosystem of cloud infrastructure, automation, observability, security, that's all DevOps kind of work. So I thank you for coming in, and I'm hoping that everybody has a better understanding of what DevOps is and how I can help. So I'll open up to questions.
I have a question. Given your significant military experience, where's the balloon from? China. Right. Okay, who's got questions? Who's got real questions? Eli.
So I'm just curious, being all the way out here in Asheville, Western North Carolina, like, what size clients do you go after? Maybe employee numbers or revenue per year? Like, what actually does a good client for you look like?
That's a great question. I've had clients that are 5-person shops that are trying to build out an MVP post-funding, and I've also had clients that were $100 million unicorn clients as well, and they're trying to really scale up. The target best client for me is generally post-A round. So that means that they've got their idea, they're probably not going to pivot a bunch more, they really need to build, scale, productionalize, all of those sorts of things. That's really a sweet spot. Sometimes I've come in earlier, and that works okay too. I had a client out in California that was, they had a problem where they were rebuilding and reconceptualizing their platform multiple times. They wrote it in Ruby, then they wrote it in Go, then they wrote it in JavaScript and Python, and they kept basically reinventing the same wheel in different languages. I kind of went in and said, let's stop doing that. Let's move forward and get it, productionalized. And then their next goal was to land Meta as a client. So that was pretty ambitious. And they had to go through a really extensive pen test. They had to go through, start preparing for SOC. They had to have a really reliable platform. And I built all that for them, and they landed Meta.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jen. Thanks for making it accessible for people like me and understandable. My question is, how do you predict when something is going to crash, like a website's going to crash, and how do you prevent that from happening in e-commerce?
That's a great question. So there's a couple of things. The observability side I mentioned, kind of like eyes on target, is really helpful. So that not only do you develop what is normal for your e-commerce site, but what's abnormal, and notify me when something's abnormal. That's a semi-reactive way of, proactive reactive way of doing it. But the real answer is you build it to where if things crash, it doesn't matter. So you build it in ways called like high availability and fault tolerance. You build it so you have virtual presences in your stack so that no one thing is like that single point of failure. You build redundancy across all of your systems, so if pieces of your system die, they automatically get restarted or rebuilt on the fly, and the scale handles nicely. That's the way to really do it, but you also have to have, you can't build it bulletproof to auto scale and be highly scalable, all that sort of stuff, and ignore the observability. That's when you get into mistakes. For example, let's say you have a hacker that's trying to get your bread at a reduction rate, so they're trying every coupon. So I had a real client this happened to. They would spam coupon codes at Mach 1 to try to get gift cards. So this equaled something like 1 million hits a minute, all right, as they were slamming the site. And the thing is your cloud infrastructure, since it's built so well, will start scaling with that load. So not only are the rest of the customers getting a worse experience because there's so much saturation on the site, but it's scaling out of control, which is really expensive for the company. So building that observability to say, wow, this is on fire. I was going from, say, 1,000 hits a minute on average to 1 million hits a minute. It's real easy to see on an uptick like that. Then I can put mitigating controls in to kill off that traffic and reduce that cost burst. Because in that way, the site was still online. It was still working. It was responding to all that increased load. But you had the observability to catch and stop that problem. So it's kind of twofold. It's actually, it's many folds, but the idea is to build it to where it doesn't crash and then make sure you're watching it.
Thank you.
Do you do disaster recovery plans?
Yes. And it's business continuity planning. And for my government days, I used to have to do business continuity planning and disaster recovery plans when I worked at the VA. So it's a near and dear spot to my heart. Actually, back in 2009, I had to build an entire hot site because we had one stack. The only insurance centers in Philadelphia. It's a very old business. It's from like 1895. And I had to build a hot site in St. Paul because it has to be so far from Philadelphia. And I had all the data replicating over, and I had virtualization through this was the VMware days, to where I could flip and turn on the other site within 10 minutes.
Wait, the VA had a hot site?
I built the hot site for the insurance center, stack only.
Okay. I was like, that's very expensive to have a hot site, so I'm surprised the VA's really doing that, but
Well, the veterans, we had a mandate to where the veterans had to be able to process their claims within so many hours. So we couldn't afford to go down because when I got there, the original plan was just to buy and ship hardware outside the disaster zone and then restore everything, which would take weeks.
Real quick, what's a hot site?
All right, so I'll go through this. I'll give the Reader's Digest version of what this is. So a cold site is you have cold hardware sitting somewhere with no data, it's not on, but it's kind of like a duplicate of whatever your business is. And if you have a problem, you ship tapes or data over there and you turn everything on, load it, kind of restore everything. It's very lengthy, but it's lower cost. Warm site is where you have most things running over there. It's quicker to kind of recover things. And a hot site is where both are running online, they both have data, and you can just flip a switch and start serving traffic or serving customers on the other side.
Back here. First, thanks. Appreciate the presentation and the growth analogy. Also, I have a question about Terraform, so I might catch up with you about that after the presentation. But How do you, in working with government entities and startups, how do you sort of balance security and regulatory compliance with being able to move fast and iterate quickly? Because at least in my experience, I've noticed that sometimes the more focus on security and compliance, the slower things can move. So how do you balance those two?
That's a great question. First off, I can't help you with Terraform. The second thing is the answer is always automation. And I'll give you more answer than that. So having worked HIPAA compliance, SOC compliance, ISO, PCI, FISMA, all those kinds of regulatory models, when the auditors come in, they're going to expect you to provide them a tremendous amount of things, whether they call them RFQs or RFAs, right, the request for artifacts. And then it's on the dev and the ops and the security team to provide all this information, all this proof, and so on and so forth. The way to move fast in that regulatory space is to have all those controls automated. Because one of the things that takes so long is going back and rechecking that everything is still locked down, right? So designing it from the beginning to hit those compliance models makes it a much lower bar of entry for developers to be able to work in that environment because they don't have to worry about it. If they're constantly having to tinker and reharden and recheck and everything, it becomes kind of a nightmare. Just to give you an example, back in 2016, actually this got 2 victories in it. We had to go through a HIPAA, ISO, high trust, and SOC 2 type 1 audit. And it was a full, it wasn't super cool, but it was a full web 3-tier architecture with Puppet and Terraform and Autoscale and all these cool technologies, right? And everything was automated to the point where we went through all those audits in 3 days. And then, the fun part is the company became insolvent on Halloween, and nobody knew it. And the company shut down that day. They fired everybody because the company was out of business. But AWS didn't pull the plug for 6 months, and the platform that I managed, my team, ran for 6 months without automation, without anyone touching it. That's good automation.
I have a question about how you work. Do you go in just by yourself and you're more an advisor to the team that's there, or do you bring in your own like SWAT team?
Thank you for that question. So I have a lot of scar tissue on what I'll call the dropship model. And what the dropship model is, and I'll answer your question, I promise. The dropship model is you get this awesome sales team that comes in and tells you, yeah, whatever it is, we can do it, no problem. And then you get this really smart solutions architect that comes in and says, this is how we're going to design it, it's going to be so awesome. Right? And you're like, I'm sold, on contract. Then you get these professional services people that get drop shipped in, they look at the contract and go, this is unreasonable, or this won't even work. I've been on both sides of that fence and it sucks. So it's just me, but I go in, I have like a few conversations with the client and do a discovery and kind of understand what they need. I write a very specific delivery-based contract. I design it for them and then I execute it for them. So there's no bait and switch, there's no drop ship model. It's just me, which I build a lot of scalable systems and I am not a scalable system. Right? But for right now, that model has been working well because I can always control the quality. I can control the execution and make sure the client is happy.
Just a quick question. I've heard you use the term SOC a couple of times, and I'm guessing you're not talking about Argyle. So could you just let us know real quick what that is?
It's a regulatory compliance and security operations controls, I think, if I remember correctly. But it's specific IT controls showing that you have audit trails, backups, you have least privilege going on. It's a lot of very technical controls to make it. What it does is it advertises to companies or customers you work with that you have a lot of auditable, verifiable controls in your infrastructure.
This is kind of a follow-on to the last question, but from the client's perspective, when they're thinking about hiring you as a consultant versus having some of this capability in-house, what does that kind of thinking look like? I mean, I'm hearing you say there's what feels like there's a lot of kind of process and systems and creating the groundwork, where I can see that as a consulting model, but what is the trade-off from the client's perspective on having this more kind of sustainably? And what kind of clients might want to have DevOps kind of in-house versus kind of outsourcing it to a consultant?
There's a couple questions in there. I'm going to try to answer all of them. So, a lot of clients I go into at their size don't have any DevOps presence, or we'll quote unquote call them DevOps engineers. So a lot of times you'll have, whatever platform they're building out, you have a development team, engineering manager, like a CTO or a VP of engineering, and they've just kind of been building it to go to market. But all those things I've talked about, that's all been ignored. So I kind of get them right back on track completely, and oftentimes I help them hire my replacement and train them up, or I cross-train some of the developers to be able to manage it. My goal is never to be like sticky. It's not to be kind of like, you need me now, I have to stay here. It's always to be able to deliver and turn over. On the other hand, I have gone into places that do have DevOps engineers. Sometimes either they're overwhelmed, or they're undertrained, or they need help in some of this technology. So I'll help level up wherever they're needing it and cross-train them so that they can kind of run it on their own. That's generally, that's the way it's worked for all my clients. Some clients aren't ready for it. Some clients, they're still coming up with their idea phase. They're still kind of building out their platform, and bringing me in is kind of premature because it might change a lot. But I still like to go in and advise them. Kind of off contract, give them recommendations, push them in the right directions, get them thinking about when they should bring someone like me in. And on the other side, I've seen customers that think they want something and don't know what they're asking for. One of the hot words in the market is Kubernetes, and I've had lots of customers say, we need to go to Kubernetes, and that answer is almost always wrong. So it really depends. Also, I'm going to give you a little bit more information because I think it's important. There's a lot of people that are like me in the space. And what they do is they design a model and drop ship it into a client. And they like clients where their model works. And if they can't put it in, they generally refer those customers to me to do the messy work. I try to go into what the customer has and help improve what they have and train them, rather than get them just to adopt a model and then pay me like professional services month over month. A lot of times customers, they really just need to get their value out the door, and they need to be able to do that better, versus having to now kind of like adopt a new model and having it kind of shoved in your face.
Hey John, over here. Hey, speaking of Kubernetes and containerization, so you've mentioned a couple of times that some guys in the garage might not be ready for you or might not be ready for your services. But if you had to advise a group of guys in the garage on architectural best practices or methodology, meaning the tiers, containerization, cloud native, serverless stuff, which of those three are you most fond of, and which do you think, or what's your thinking around that? What do you think would lead somebody in either of the three directions?
That's a great question. So for everybody else in the room also, there's kind of three standard models to build in architecture for modern cloud computing. You have the 3-tier architecture with Java scales, the containerized architecture, and then an event-based function sort of architecture. So generally, I will advise an approach based on what I think they can handle first, and second, what I think the right model is for the software. So if I think the software should be containerized, I might advise them to go with a simpler container solution like App Runner or ECS versus straight to Kubernetes, or even just running in single containers like on Beanstalk just to get their feet wet, and have them have like a progression model. Like, let's start here, get used to it, and then we'll go ECS or Kubernetes, something like that. A lot of times, most of the time when I talk to those folks in the garage, they have it either running on their laptop or it just runs on one server in the cloud, and then they just overwrite the software on it when they want to deploy. So at the very least, I try to get them to go to container first. It's not common I'll get them to go to event-driven architecture, because that takes a lot of complexity to that, and I feel like a more advanced crew would adopt that much easier.
Again, real quick, since we've talked about containerization a bit and Kubernetes, and it's on your t-shirt, just for people who aren't familiar, can you just give a quick 411 on what that is?
So there is no such thing as a quick 411 Kubernetes. Kubernetes is, you hear it called a lot of things. You hear it called a cloud operating system. It's an ecosystem of ecosystems. What it is it is a scheduler and an orchestrator for these things called containers. And the best way I can explain this is think of it as your app running in the smallest amount of space possible on the cloud. And as you need more of that app to run, it will automatically make more of those containers for you. And as you need less of it to run, it automatically takes them away. But it handles all the networking, the security, the authorization, the authentication. It handles things like deployments. It's a very complex model that lives on another model. It has, like I said, an ecosystem to support it. It's a very powerful piece of technology that Google engineers developed, and it's open source, and every cloud has some sort of adoption for Kubernetes. Because it is that popular, it's that powerful. I mean, Google runs, I think, millions of containers in the cloud, and I've seen, back to clients, I've seen clients come in and say, I want to do what Google does. I had a client say, I want to do what Netflix does. They had basic servers, basic applications. They didn't need to scale millions of containers. It's just not realistic, and it's not cost-friendly either. So, yeah, Kubernetes is complicated. There is no H in Kubernetes, in case everybody's spelling it out.
First off, thanks for the presentation. Great, describing technical things in a very straightforward way. Appreciate all that work. Looking at the major clouds, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, do you have one that you favor, or do you have one that you see works best for the folks in the garage or people just kind of starting out?
Yes, I have an exact answer for both questions. So I prefer AWS. I've been using it for over 10 years. I've been using GCP for about 4 years. I have less experience in Azure, but I'm an old school Microsoft admin, so I know Windows and all that stuff very well. So AWS I do prefer. Now let's get to your second question. So GCP is really great for that developer that wants to go fast and deploy quick. They are built for that developer. So a lot of hackathon shops, like incubator shops that want to crunch code really fast and use cool tools, I see a lot of them in GCP because it's friendly for that. As someone that's had to operationalize and manage it, it's very painful. So for AWS, it's kind of a nice blend where they do have lots of development tools. It's very, very mature, hardened, and operationalized, and it's complex. And there's so much, AWS also, and all the clouds in general, but AWS in general has the paradox of choice problem of which of these things that can do this is the right choice. And how should I design all those layers of security and scalability and all that sort of stuff. So a lot of times, fast and dirty, I generally point to GCP. Enterprise, mid-level, or want to operationalize it better, I point to AWS. Heavy Microsoft shops, your corporate environments, I point to Azure.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So you are wearing a lot of hats in your work, and one of those hats, it sounds like, is sales. Do you ever run into a situation where you have a development team that wants to work with you, but you have to convince other stakeholders that what you do is going to help, and they don't, when those stakeholders don't quite understand exactly all of the, inner workings of your services? If so, how do you navigate that?
That is a really good question. And I wish I actually had that problem. The problem I have typically is I come in at the top. Most of the time I meet the VP of engineering, the CTO or CEO, and then they have to kind of sell me coming in to the developers.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm coming in as this existential threat to whatever it is they're doing. I'm going to take your fun away or whatever it could be. So a lot of times I generally keep it very simple. Whenever I start a new conversation with a client or with the development team, I just ask them, what's your top 3 problems? Not what's your technical problems, is Kubernetes broken or anything like that. It's what's your top 3 problems? And you will always, always, always get people to tell you more than 3 problems. Guaranteed. And a lot of times they're the same problems. So let me answer this piece of the question, and then I'll answer your direct question. I have so much experience working with so many different clients and companies that I've seen most things. So I can relate to whatever their primary problems are and talk through it with them. But I'm also not an expert at everything. I've talked to clients where their problems were like the landing contracts and legal stuff, which I don't know. So I'm up front and say, like, this is just not my expertise. Or I can bring somebody in to help you, but it's not me, right? As far as evangelizing for the developers up, since I generally start the relationship at the top, it's very easy for me to say, bless you, thank you. It's very easy for me to say this is what we need to do because I'm side counsel. One of the benefits of being a mercenary versus an employee is I can go to that CTO and say, stop doing this wrong. Or I can say, you need to put money into this or you're gonna have a bad day and you're gonna remember it because it's gonna be way more expensive. I can give them the hard business without fear of retribution, and they can fire me too. I've had to tell clients, you're doing this wrong. You know, I would stake a claim that this is going to fail very soon, and go ahead and fire me. Feel free. You know, I'm not your employee. You're paying me to give you the hard business. So it generally doesn't, like the sales side going up is not my problem. It's often going down.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, John. Thanks for the presentation. I want to just track back a little bit. You're a very interesting human. And we've heard a lot about your DevOps. I love your enthusiasm for DevOps. My question is, what do you do for fun?
Yeah, how about a vision book?
Okay.
Or at least, let me write it down, because I didn't buy it.
Well, thank you very much. And just if you want, also I printed off. There's a QR code outside. I can show you that, or I can show you exactly where to find it, so you can scan it and bring up the books easily for you. But more than happy to share that with you. Thank you so much. Back to your question. So one thing, apart from writing fantasy fiction, I also love to travel. I've been around the world. I really love being in Africa and being on safari. This is one of the few days I didn't bring my safari hat in. I felt like that wasn't appropriate for this presentation. But I really love traveling. I was in the military, so I've been around the world. And I like hiking. I love being here in North Carolina. I've also lived around the country. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I was in the military in California. I lived in downtown Philadelphia for almost 20 years and survived that. Now I live down here, and I'm so glad I got to watch the Eagles from the safety of my home without it being lit on fire or the car flipped. So happy that I got to do that this year. So yeah, a lot of travel, a lot of writing, that sort of stuff.
John, got one more question for you. Sorry, so and this probably requires a little bit of prefacing. For all these cloud services, they all have very similar services inside of their offerings. They may all have the reporting capabilities inside of each of these cloud services. Are there specific, and also think about it like Walmart brand things. Like there's the generic brand of something, and then there's like the more expensive designer brand of something. Are there specific services that you think are cloud native to these three guys that you wouldn't use, that you would pull in other things? I've heard you say Cloudflare, Datadog before.
This is personal preference, and this is going way back to my Windows admin days. Microsoft Windows servers used to do everything for you too. They had backup capabilities, they had reporting capabilities, they had firewall capabilities, they had proxy, you could use these routers, all that type of stuff. I never used any of that crap. Always used a third-party product because it just did the job better. Not to say that it's crap, It's just when you need to productionalize it, you need it to be reliable, you need to be able to sleep at night, you have to make sure that it's working. So depending on my client's budget, it depends on when I recommend, like I'll recommend something, but if their budget can't handle it, then we have to go for more of the cheaper available. Like using, for instance, Stackdriver and GCP as their observability platform versus going to Datadog. I'd always go to Datadog first, but it's an additional cost, right? You pay for Stackdriver too, but it's much cheaper because it's just built into Google. For instance, for the edge computing, you have Google Edge and you have CloudFront for AWS for some of that origin support and security. But I do love Cloudflare quite a bit. It's just a great tool. You can use Terraform to automate it. It's very responsive. They have a lot of additional powerful pieces to it. So it really depends on their budget. And also, I think sometimes you can cut costs by not always using the coolest tool as well. Sometimes you can just go cheap and easy because that's what they need.
Thanks. I'm not going to make John explain all that because I've got lunch plans. But I want to thank you very much for making this very effective.